Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We're gathered today on the 1st of February, 2025 on the Gregorian calendar, which coincides with the 23rd of the 11th month on our Creator's calendar as we comprehend it. And we're continuing, bless you, by the way. Sorry about that. And we're continuing with our reading of the book of Yobelim, our study of Jubilees, if you will. Which is also known as the Division of the Days. That's the official title that it was given by the Yahudim and those that kept the Dead Sea Scrolls. And it's also known as Little Genesis, as a nickname that we scholars of today call it because of the content. So we're currently on Yobelim chapter 6. We've just went through the events leading up to the flood. And then going through it, and now it's kind of recapping what had happened at what points of time, and that they were being commemorated by our forefather Noach. I want to remind everyone this is the first example of a man instituting festivals or remembrance days that was now told to be kept perpetually for all righteous people. And then it's even kept after our Creator comes and we're living through the millennial reign, where it says from Chodesh to Chodesh, they call it new moon, right? Or new month to new month. And from every Sabbath to Sabbath, all flesh shall come to worship before me, says Yahuwah. But right here, this is where Noach went forth from the ark and made atonement. It says, and on the new month of the 3rd month, he went forth from the ark and built an altar on that mountain. And he made atonement for the earth, and took a kid and made atonement by its blood for all the guilt of the earth. Because by blood is atonement made, right? With blood is the propitiation for sins, because the soul or the life is in the blood. This is for everything that had been on it had been destroyed, save those that were in the ark with Noach. And we've gone over that, I believe it was just last week with the creation account. Or I'm sorry, it might have been the week before. With the creation account being a parable of our Creator's works through history. The second work, or the first work on the second day, rather, the 8th work total, the 8th letter, it was the firmament, and it lines up with the flood. The living creatures, the letter Cheth is just the same as the living creatures, the very word for the ones that went into the ark that were delivered. It says, and he placed the fat thereof on the altar, and he took an ox and a goat and a sheep and kids and salt and a turtle dove and the young of a dove, and placed a burnt sacrifice on the altar, and poured thereon an offering mingled with oil, and sprinkled wine, and stewed frankincense over everything, and caused a goodly savor to arise acceptable before Yahuwah. And we, in some of the things that were shared by Ron Wyatt, he found the altar stone where these offerings were made. It's a huge rock that he went up on. The way it was set up, you can see there was a whole fenced-in area. There was different pens. It was believed to be the original house that Noach built for him and his wife and family when they came out of the ark. It was later said to be a Roman installation, but when he had first found it, the house was still intact. Some of the wall was still there. The tombstones were not smashed, and it was still intact. It was later on defaced. They broke things up and broke it down to hide the fact that they were grave robbing. But the windows in the house were built in such a way that he'd never seen before, to where it would allow light to come in and get the most amount of angle opening to allow it to open into the air or into the area the most. It was pretty interesting the way he described it. Um, I can't really do justice to it, I suppose, myself, but it was just, I'll have to let you see it for yourself. I'll find the one where he talks about that if I can and share those with you as well. And I'll try to put it in the description for the chat here. Ron White's discoveries of Noah's Ark and the area around Ararat or Uratu where they were. But this, just like he told the Yisraeli later on, it was an unhewn stone that the altar was made of. It was just a big rock. It says, "And Yahuwah smelt the goodly savor, and he made a covenant with him that there should not be any more a flood to destroy the earth, that all the days of the earth, seed time and harvest, should never cease, cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night should not change their order, nor cease forever. And you increase you and multiply upon the earth, and become many upon it, and be a baraka upon it. The fear of you and the dread of you I will inspire in everything that is on earth and in the sea. And behold, I have given unto you all beasts, and all winged things, and everything that moves on the earth, and the fish in the waters, and all things for food. See, and all things for food, as the green herbs, I have given you all things to eat. Now, this is a second witness to what you can find in Bereshit or Genesis, where he directly mentions that every creeping thing he's given for men to consume. Uh, this doesn't mean that the dietary laws do not exist. This does not mean that they are not applicable today, because they are. There's nowhere where he's changed and said believers can now eat swine. If we are his temple, we are his dwelling place, then it stands to reason that you don't profane it, right? Because he's giving you the instructions on what is clean and unclean, and what is offered to him and what is not. He has never changed that. He has changed what he's given men to eat, as you see right here. Before, it was just the the fruits of the trees and the seed-bearing plant. Now it's everything that moves, all creatures. And after he brings his children to himself, he gives them specific instructions on what is clean and unclean for them to eat. That's enumerated also in the renewed covenant, or Kepha or Shimon Kepha, Simon Peter mentions that he has never touched anything or eaten anything common or unclean, even after it's offered to him 3 times after our Mashiach came, right? So I don't advocate that we should do that today, but that doesn't change the fact that this is what's written right here, and that's what's written in Bereshit. I'm not going to change those things because it's later on different. We just have to deal with what is. And this is why it says in the Dead Sea Scrolls specifically that the intelligent, or the instructed, if you will, that word maskil, which is used for intelligence, they translate as the instructor or the instructed on occasion. But it says the intelligent will studiously look into every law and see which ones are still applicable for them today, which is what I highly encourage all of us to do, not just believing anybody, but studying these things for ourselves, right? That's why I'm not going through here paraphrasing what I think this means to everybody. We're going through and reading it, and we're trying to get the best translations of these things that we can, so that we can all see with our own eyes, hear with our ears, and determine in our own heart the truth that he's giving us, which is the only lawful way to come to him. We should never just believe what a man tells us in regard to the truth. If there's accompanying signs from above, yes, of course, you believe without question the things that he's given with miracles, right? There's established facts for that. Um, until they prove otherwise. If they've done things, if they have miracles happen, but they're saying serve someone other than Yahuwah Elohim of the Hebrews, that's a false prophet, right? So we have to use discernment, and we have to, above all things, have his word as our head, our plumb line, if you will. He says, but the flesh with the life thereof, the nephesh, or soul thereof, with the blood, you shall not eat. For the soul, the nephesh, of all flesh is in the blood, lest your blood of your lives be required. At the hand of every man, at the hand of every beast, will I require the blood of man. Whoso sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of Yahuwah made he man. And you increase you and multiply on the earth. And Noach and his sons swore that they would not eat any blood that was in any flesh. And he made a covenant before Yahuwah forever throughout all the generations of the earth in this month. And that was on the 15th of the third month, the time that every covenant ever made was born or birthed into creation, including the renewed covenant where his body was born again. So these things are parallels, they're echoes of the truth, if you will. On this account he spoke to you that you should make a covenant with the children of Israel in this month upon the mountain with an oath. The oath that he would never bring the flood again. This oath is the oath that he would be their Elohim and they would be his people. We just read about it. They ratified the covenant 3 times, saying all that he says we will hear and we will do. And then they broke it, but that's a different thing. That was part of what was going to happen when he came, in the same manner. And it says, and that you should sprinkle blood upon them because of all the words of the covenant which Yahuwah made with them forever. And this testimony is written concerning you that you should observe it continually, so that you should not eat on any day any blood of beasts or birds or cattle during all the days of the earth. And the man who eats the blood of beast or of cattle or of birds during all the days of the earth, he and his seed shall be rooted out of the land. Now, this is one of the reasons why the adversary has his people do those kind of things, because it's directly contrary to what it's written. But we don't want to be rooted out of the land, and there's a lot of things that happen. That's why we don't want to eat things that are strangled either. You make sure that it's properly cold, if you will. It says, and do you command the children of Yisrael to eat no blood, so that their names and their seed may be before Yahuwah our King, or our Elohim, continually. And for this Torah there is no limit of days, for it is forever. They shall observe it throughout their generations, so that they may continue supplicating on your behalf with blood before the altar, every day at the time of morning and evening. And this is the continual, that which is continual, the morning and evening offerings of the Lamb, a type and picture of our Mashiach's continual condensation of himself for our benefit by his mercy. They shall seek forgiveness on your behalf perpetually before Yahuwah, that they may keep it and not be rooted out. That was what that was trying to show them, right? And remember, it was when Antiochus, the little horn out of the Grecian Empire from the vision from Daniel, that would take away that which is continual. It was the morning and evening offerings for 3.5 years. And then the very same day that it was stopped, what we call December 25th. That very same day it was reinstituted, and that was what Hanukkah or the rededication was all about. He says, and he gave to Noach and his sons a sign that there should not again be a flood on the earth. And he set his bow in the cloud for a sign of the eternal covenant, that there should not again be a flood on the earth to destroy it all the days of the earth. For this reason it is ordained and written on the Shamayim tablets that they should celebrate the Feast of Weeks in this month once a year to renew the covenant every year. For this whole festival was celebrated in Shamayim from the day of creation till the days of Noach. So the festivals that Noach instituted as a man were already kept in the Shamayim previous and not actually in creation until he manifested it. That's something to keep in mind because other things were instituted by men. Abraham instituted Passover. We'll see as we read through here. Yaakov added to it. It became different from what it was originally established, and how they kept it is different from how it was given to Moshe. And it was different from how it was kept in the wilderness to in the land. The instructions changed by his will, just as he's done other things by his will through time. And that's why it says that we should studiously look into every law to see what is still applicable, because some things were added due to the bonds of transgression, the golden calf, for example. Then you had all the purgations, the washings, the separations for uncleanness, the separation for touching the dead. None of that existed beforehand. Yahusuf touched his dead father. Yaakov slept in the bosom of Abraham when he died. None of them were considered unclean. There's other examples of things changing, and those were the added bonds because of transgression to teach men righteousness with physical things, to teach a spiritual application. Now, the dietary laws, like I've mentioned, I've never found them changed. They're still applicable. The circumcision, you can read where Shaul says, if you do it, you're bound to keep the entire Torah, which is impossible. You're putting yourself under a curse. You divorce yourself from Mashiach. You can do it if you want to. If you've had it done to you and you've had no choice in the matter, you're not obligatory to accept that as your fault, right? Whether you're circumcised or you're not, you're his. He knows it. You serve him or you don't. That's your choice. What you do with your children in obedience to the truth, as you hear, if you're hearing this, you should really study it and then make that decision. But I wouldn't want to bind myself by doing such a thing to my own children willingly. Okay? Right here it says, and this whole festival was celebrated in Shamayim from the day of creation till the days of Noach, 26 Yobelim and 5 weeks of years, from 1309 to 1659 Anno Mundi, or from creation. And that right there is almost the differences between the Yobelim's version of when the flood happened, right? From 1308 to when the Masoretic text says it happened about 300 years later. But this is how long it's saying that he kept the festival, just so you can see that. And it says, and Noach and his sons observed it for 7 Yobelim and 1 week of years, or 350 years, till the day of Noach's death. And from the day of Noach's death, his sons did away with it until the days of Abraham, and they ate blood. There's a part that mentions in the recognitions of Clement, or in the I believe it's in Sirach, where it mentions that it doesn't prosper you to do well in the beginning and then turn away at the end. All that stuff you'd done before won't be remembered. It mentions it in Ezekiel, well, if you recall, if you mentioned about those that do righteousness and or those that do wickedness, and when they turn from one or the other, right? But it says, but Abraham observed it, and Yitzhak and Jacob, his children, observed it up to your days, and in your days the children of Israel forgot it, until you celebrated it anew on this mountain. And do you command the children of Israel to observe this festival in all their generations, for a commandment unto them, one day a year, or one day in the year, in this month, they shall celebrate the festival. For it is the Feast of Weeks, and the Feast of the First Fruits. The Feast of Weeks, because you're counting from first fruits, remember, from the Abib barley on first fruits, you count 50 to Shavuot, which is the 15th of the third month, and that's when you bring your 2 loaves of wheat bread, not just the barley grain, but wheat in its full development and then made into bread. You present the 2 loaves to him then, which again is like the renewed covenant, the 2 houses made full with the leaven, with his doctrine that he had brought them forth through. It's all a parable. Keep in mind what he did with them after the resurrection until he gave the pouring out of the Ruach. It's a picture there, but in a smaller scale of what he had already done from taking them out of Egypt as his Abib barley people and carrying them all the way through until that time. It says, for it is the Feast of Weeks and the Feast of Feast of First Fruits. This feast is twofold and of a double nature, according to what is written and engraved concerning it. Celebrate it. For I have written in the book of the first Torah, in that which I have written for you, that you should celebrate it in its season, one day in the year. And I explained to you its sacrifices, that the children of Israel should remember and should celebrate it throughout their generations in this month, one day in every year. And on the new month of the first month, and on the new month of the fourth month, and on the new month of the seventh month, and on the new month of the 10th month are the days of remembrance, and the days of the seasons in the 4 divisions of the year. These are written and ordained as a testimony forever. And Noach ordained them for himself as feasts for the generations forever, so that they have become thereby a memorial unto him. And on the new month of the first month, he was bidden to make for himself an ark. And on that, the earth became dry, and he opened and saw the earth. And on the new month of the fourth month, the mouths of the depths of the abyss beneath were closed. And on the new month of the seventh month, all the mouths of the abysses of the earth were opened, and the waters began to descend into them. And on the new month of the 10th month, the tops of the mountains were seen, and Noach was glad. And on this account he ordained them for himself as feasts, for a memorial forever. And thus they are ordained. And they placed them on the Shamayim tablets. Each had 13 weeks, from one to another, their memorial, from the first to the second, and from the second to the third, and from the third to the fourth. And we've gone over this before where we've looked at the calendar. It has 3, 6, 9 months, and then the first 3, the middle 3, and the last 3 are all identical in how they're placed. They repeat themselves. They all have 13 weeks just like that. They all have exactly 364 days. So if you want, we'll go over it again sometime, but we'll just keep reading for now. It says, "In all the days of the commandment will be 52 weeks of days, and the entire year is complete. Thus it is engraved and ordained on the Shamayim tablets, and there is no neglecting for a single year or from year to year." So there's no intercalation. And command you, the children of Yisrael, that they observe the years according to this reckoning, 364 days. And these will constitute a complete year, and they will not disturb its time from its days and from its feasts, for everything will fall out in them according to their testimony, and they will not leave out any day nor disturb any feasts. But if they do neglect and do not observe them according to his commandment, then they will disturb all their seasons, and the years will be dislodged from this order, or they'll be dislodged from this, what he'd said, 364 days, 13 weeks in each season, and you don't intercalate, right? It says, and they will disturb the seasons, and the years will be dislodged, and they will neglect their ordinances. And all the children of Israel will forget and will not find the path of the years, and will forget the new months and seasons and Sabbaths, and they will go wrong as to all the order of the years. And if you do an honest review of the differences between the Gregorian calendar and our Creator's calendar, they have gone wrong in every way. It even says in the Bible that he's given to the nations to bow down to the entire host of the heavens, which means the stars. And we've gone over it before, but if you look into why the Gregorian calendar has a 365.25 odd day year, it's because it keeps the stars in sync with it. It's not about the sun. It says, for I know, and from henceforth I will declare it unto you, and it is not of my own devising, for the book is written before me, and on the Shamaim tablets the division of days is ordained, lest they forget the feast of the covenant, and walk according to the feast of the nations, after their error, and after their ignorance. For there will be those who will assuredly make observations of the moon, how it disturbs the seasons and comes in from year to year, 10 days too soon. For this reason, the years will come upon them when they will disturb the order, and make an abominable the day of testimony, and an unclean day a feast day, and they will confound all the days, the Kodesh with the unclean, and the unclean with the Kodesh. For they will go wrong as to the months and Shabbats and feasts and Yobelim. For this reason I command and testify to you, that you may testify to them. For after your death your children will disturb them, so that they will not make the year 364 days only. And for this reason they will go wrong as to the new months and seasons and Sabbaths and festivals, and they will eat all kinds of blood with all kinds of flesh. And this is the key, because they will not make the year 364 days only. That goes for anyone even trying to keep this calendar that wants to add a day in between or a week or whatever. It's not allowed. We're falling into the same pit if we do that, because it's nowhere written for us to do such a thing. It's also not written to look for a line in the ground with a stick and the sun on a specific day, or to do any other contrivance to try to determine it other than what it says to count and look for the signs that are written about what's going to happen, right? As far as I'm aware, there is no writing that tells us that we are to do such a thing, and we're not meant to go or think beyond what is written. I've only seen problems come from when we do that very thing in that regard, but I'm more than welcome to be pleasantly surprised and happily corrected if someone does have information where it's written that you do such things. But I haven't found it. I found it directly contrary to that. We look for signs in the sun and in the moon and in the seasons. He gives us very particular things that happen on those very particular days that you can look for to see if it's actually happening to prove it's true. And you don't really need to go beyond that and then to count, right? It says, for this reason they will go wrong as to the new months, the Hodeshim, and the seasons, and Sabbaths, and festivals, and they will eat all kinds of blood with all kinds of flesh. Yobelim 7. Here's an important one, okay? This is a foundation for what's to come after, and there's actually a section that we might take a segue here and look at if we have an opportunity. But one thing that is not mentioned in the Bible or the Tanakh, if you want to call it that, or in the book of Yobelim here, is what happened with the the sleep that Noach had when he was uncovered. We're about to read that here in what's called the Genesis Apocryphon. It's a writing from the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's in fragments. I I personally believe the Genesis Apocryphon is what we would know as the Book of Jasher or Yashar, the original book of the upright, which is the first-hand writings, like the journal of Noach, the journal of Hanok, if you will, the journal of Lamech, the journal of Abram, his personal account of the things that were happening, the records of Yitzhak and Yaakov, they would have been in there too. We don't have them anymore, but it flows from one man to another in different narratives in the first person. In there, you have writings from Noach about the vision that he had while he was sleeping and his son uncovered his nakedness. In there, he was seen as a tree, and different trees and fruits came of it, different branches, his children and descendants, and all the things he saw in parable form in that fashion were very fragmented. But he woke up knowing things that had happened and what would happen in the future because of it through the vision that he had. That's the context we don't have so clear right here that willing you'll be able to see in some time. So we'll go on. It says, and in the 7th week in the first year, 1317 AM thereof, in this Yobel, Noach planted vines. And remember, the first day he did 7 works, including Hanok, which was Enoch being taken up as part of that 7th work of light, and Adam and his son being the judgments against them happening. In the day that he did it, he died. And in the same way Cain had killed another, it was done to him. Righteous judgment, like a weapon, the light being manifested, all happened in the first 930 years, before 1,000 years had transpired. After that, in the second day, literally in the going on the 2000th, going towards that 2000, that's when the flood happened. And it's the only work of our Creator for this next 1,000 years until he gives, you have Tet, the separations of the nations after the flood, and the dividing of the waters, the kingdoms and things that came about of it. Yod is the seed and all sprouting things, which be the word, the promise given to Abraham. But that's not done until almost like the covenant itself isn't given until the next day. That Yod isn't done until 2,410 years from creation, right? So there's different time frames here, but I want to show you that the works are generally done in order and in the period that he's given it for. Although I don't know if everything's perfectly mapped out. I don't know of any dates that we have that are perfectly set either. These are all circa or approximate, if you will. But it says, and in the 7th week of the first Yobel, 1317 AM, thereof, in this Yobel, Noach planted vines on the mountain on which the ark had rested, named Lubar, one of the Uratu mountains, or Araratin mountains, and they produced the fruit in the 4th year. 13:20 a.m. And he guarded their fruit and gathered it in this year in the 7th month. Okay. So just like the fruits are uncircumcised the first 3 years, and the fourth it's Kadosh Lo Yahuwah, right? And then the fifth you can do with it what you will. Same principle being practiced here. And that means it was a preceding law on how to garden and produce those things that he had handed down to him, and he was still keeping. But we don't have the instructions for that until the Torah. It says, and he guarded their fruit and gathered it in the 7th month, in this year in the 7th month. And he made wine therefrom, and put it into a vessel and kept it until the 5th year, 1321 Anno Mundi, until the first day on the Chodesh of the 1st month. And he celebrated with joy the day of this feast. So he kept a feast, he ate, he drank, and he rejoiced before his Maker. That's outside of the land without any temple. That very phenomenon, although in sadness, was done by Tobiyahu in the book Tobit, where you can see him keeping the feast, trying to invite the poor, but doing that very thing. This is all we are required to do in our celebration of these festivals, is to eat, rejoice, have joy in your heart that you're keeping his appointed time. And while we might do it in sadness for the conditions we're living in and the circumstances that we find ourselves, we might not always have the poor to help out, but when we can, we should, and invite them here. Of believers, you don't bring an atheist just because he's homeless to your house on a festival day to celebrate your creator. I hope that makes sense. I'm not trying to be rude. And he celebrated with joy the day of this feast, and he made a burnt sacrifice unto Yahuwah, 1 young ox and 1 ram and 7 sheep, each a year old, and a kid of the goats, that he might make atonement thereby for himself and his sons. And he prepared the kid first. The kid is a baby goat. That's where that word comes from. His brother Earl kindly corrected me quite a few years ago, or a few years ago, and I had to look that up. But if you look at the 1828 Webster's Dictionary, it doesn't even say anything but a kid is a baby goat. And that is literally the Gidi. You put that K as a G, you add a D and a Y, like kitty, and that's the Hebrew word for a goat, baby goat. He says, and he prepared the kid first and placed some of its blood on the flesh of that was on the altar which he had made, and all that fat he laid on the altar where he made the burnt sacrifice, and the ox and the ram and the sheep, and he laid all their flesh upon the altar. And he placed all their offerings mingled with oil upon it, and afterwards he sprinkled wine on the fire which he had previously made on the altar. And he placed incense on the altar and caused a sweet savor to ascend, acceptable before Yahuwah his Elohim. That's one of the phenomenon with the PDFs that were produced by the gentleman behind Yahweh's sword. I think there's a change in ministry leadership now. I know one of the PDFs was changed horrendously. I don't really care for it anymore. But one of the phenomenon is that they would take the word Elohim, and instead of translating it as Elohim or putting a wrong title there, they would put it in English as sovereign ruler for whatever reason. It says, and he rejoiced and drank of this wine, he and his children with joy. And it was evening, and he went into his tent, and being drunken, he lay down and slept, and was uncovered in his tent as he slept. And it was during this sleep that he received the vision that he had. And Ham saw Noach his father naked, and went forth and told his 2 brethren without. Now, I want you to be mindful. This is just the actions of a man with his words, and then the repercussions that they have. Ham, it says, was the first magician in the recognitions of Clement. After the fallout through this, he would do things to serve the adversary and get the gifts of his spirit in him for it, what we call magic or paganism, right? Witchcraft. So, and that just started by disrespecting his father here in such a manner. We might think this is a little thing, but the repercussions are horrendous. And that should help us all walk out our own deliverance in fear and trembling, like the word tells us to, right? And Shem took his garment and arose, he and Japheth, and they placed the garment on their shoulders and went backward and covered the shame of their father, and their faces were backward. And Noach awoke from his sleep and knew all that his younger son had done unto him. And he cursed his son and said, Cursed be Canaan, an enslaved servant shall he be unto his brethren. Okay. Now, he did not curse Ham because Ham had already been Baruch, and you cannot Baruch something that you cannot curse what has been blessed as it is already established, if you all recall. Adam was Baruch or given the Baraka, and the ground was cursed because of him, not himself. And he blessed Shem or Baruch Shem and said, Baruch be Yahuwah Shaddai or Almighty of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. And Yahuwah shall enlarge Japheth, and Yahuwah shall dwell in the dwelling of Shem. And it mentions Japheth, right? Doing that too in the scriptures, I believe. But here it mentions Yahuwah will dwell in the dwelling of Shem as a foretelling of the place, the allotment that Shem would get in just a little bit here. And it says, and Canaan shall be his servant. Now, the enlargement of Japheth is commonly mistaken to people believe that it's Europe, but that's not actually the case there. The enlargement of Japheth would be the Chinese, right? The sons of Japheth, uh, the enlarged people, the largest population of a body of people anywhere is the Asiatic people there in the Far East, the fulfillment of this foretelling. And another witness to that, in one of the videos that we have already done, it was about the Katim, where we went over what the Dead Sea Scrolls, I believe we might have mentioned what was in Gad the Seer and a few other places about the Katim and how that ties it into Rome. It connects it with them. I've since learned in other places talking with other people that there's also mentions of the Kittim being Rome in the Talmud, but I never will go to that as a source of legitimacy, although I have mentioned to you all that they have collected things that are true and put it in there, as well as their own fanciful stories. But that's neither here nor there. Either way, in the video about the Kittim, in the comments there, someone had mentioned that the Kittim were not Rome and they weren't in Europe because they went to the Far East. And you can find the place names of the original cities and countries and areas of that of China with the name Kittim. I believe it was China. So I highly encourage you all, you go check out the comments there from that video. It's in the playlist from here for the scripture studies. And then I'll try to share that in the chat. You guys can check it out. But it's just an evidence that Japheth is what we would call Mongoloids, okay? Hamites, the sons of Ham, the sons of Cush, the Ethiopians, they are the Negroid, they're not Negroid. I'm sorry. There's three types of bone structures that are known: Mongoloid, Caucasoid, and Negroid. There's three types of men from the 30 sons of Noach, and these are known histories. When you take the information, you look about the genealogies here, you look into the early history of the migrations of the people, and you can literally account for where everyone is based off scripture. It's pretty interesting stuff. We're going to get a little more into it as we go on. There's geneticists in Answers in Genesis and other places that are doing these very works today. I've shared information off them as well. It's amazing stuff, but it really helps to show that this is true. This is where our history, comes from. One thing that helps tie this stuff together and what literally puts the names of these patriarchs to the pagan mighty ones of yesteryear. For example, Mitzrayim being known as uh, Jupiter Liber or Jupiter Liber, not the only Jupiter that was venerated by the Romans, but the one that was specifically the Memphis or Menes of Egypt. Cush was Bel, Nimrod. These are all men that, because they were doing witchcraft or magic, were venerated as mighty ones after their death. This is going over in more detail, like I said, in the recognitions. You can see the evidence of it, the facts of these things, not necessarily explained plainly, but you can see it plainly in Scripture. There was magicians in Egypt. Demons and magic were contested throughout the renewed covenant. So it's not something new. It's just not something that we've been explicitly talked or explained or studied out, really. But this kind of stuff is hidden for a reason. If we know about it, it's easy to turn away from it, right? This is, and Ham knew that his father had cursed his younger son, and he was displeased that he had cursed his son. And he parted from his father, he and his sons with him, Cush and Mitzrayim, and Put and Canaan. And he built for himself a city, and called its name after the name of his wife, Ne'elet Tamauk. Sorry about that. And Japheth saw it and became envious of his brother, and he too built for himself a city, and he called its name after the name of his wife, Adateneses. And Shem dwelt with his father Noach, and he built a city close to his father on the mountain. And he too called its name after the name of his wife, Sadiq Telebab, right? That's Zadik, like righteous, Telebab. I don't know what that part is. I'd have to look that up to break it down. And behold, I've done that before. I just can't remember it off the top of my head at the moment, so I'm sorry about that. It says, and behold, these three cities are near Mount Lubar, Zadik Telebab, fronting the mountain on its east. And this would be important. We might be able to find the refuges of this in connection with that house that Noah had built for himself, right? Because it was going to be near there, as it's mentioned right here. And that's supposedly fronting the east of the mountain, right? And Ne'el Tamuk on the south, and Adanteneses towards the west. And these are the sons of Shem, Elam, and Asher, and Aparkshad. This was born 2 years after the flood, and Lud and Aram. The sons of Japheth were Gomer, and Magog, and Madai, and Yawin, Tubal, and Meshech, and Tiraz. These are the sons of Noach. And in the 28th Yobel, 1324 to 1372 Anno Mundi, Noach began to enjoin upon his sons the ordinances and commandments, and all the judgments that he knew. And he exhorted his sons to observe righteousness, and to cover the shame of their flesh, and to barak their Creator, and honor father and mother, and love their neighbor, and guard their souls or inner beings from fornication and uncleanness and all iniquity. So, and this is what's applicable for us today, to guard from fornication. These things are, if we even look at another to lust after them, we've committed adultery in our heart. So the physical, of course, is not to be done. And then even if you're not married or if you've been divorced, right, you got to be careful. But this is why the flood happened. The watchers took women of whomever they chose, some were married and some weren't, and caused that. And that was directly what was relating to the flood. Uncleanness. This is a tricky one. People might think touching dead bodies or touching the carcass of a pig or even a living lizard, if you will make them unclean because of the added bonds of transgression. But I beg you to carefully consider the differences between the covenant, what was beforehand, and what he's established afterward, and even what he said in the flesh, where it's not what goes into the mouth that makes a man unclean, but what comes from within to the outside. And that's the uncleanness, what we manifest from inside to the outside that we have to be doing away with. And then all inequity. If you've been watching or you guys have been familiar with that word, ayin wa noon, awen, it's what we knowingly do. It's what we're aware of that we do anyways. Like if it says keep the Shabbat, you don't work on it and you do work, you've committed inequity, right? If you've read not to steal and you go out and you steal intentionally, that's inequity. You've knowingly done the thing. Beforehand, it's just a sin. After you've heard it, it's inequity. This is how I comprehend that. There's those three different words that are used. If anyone has different about what scripture says about the use of this word, please share. Okay. Just for full context, you have chata, which is the word for sin, chet, aleph, tet, hey. Then you have pesha, right, which is to transgress. And I believe that's pei, sheen, ayin. And then you have awen. They say avon or aven, but it's awen, aleph, wa, noon for inequity. It says, for owing to these three things came the flood upon the earth, namely, owing to the fornication wherein the watchers against the Torah of their ordinances went a whoring after the daughters of men, and took themselves wives of all which they chose, and they made the beginning of uncleanness, because it came from within them to do the unlawful thing. And they begat sons, the Nephilim. This is Nephidim here, but Nephilim, the fallen ones. And they were all unlike, and they devoured one another. And the giants slew the Nephil, and the Nephil slew the Elyo, and the Elyo mankind, and one man another. These are the three stages they have. This would be like the Titans. This would be the offspring of the Titans, what they call the mighty ones. And then this would be the children of those ones. Sorry, these are the children of the Titans or the Watchers directly. And they are correspondingly weaker, smaller in size and stature, etc., to the point where the largest ones, that if you remember, we have some records and evidence that some of them are over a mile tall, massively, massively large creatures. They wouldn't even worry about trying to eat men because they were too small. They wouldn't satisfy their appetite. For anyone that doesn't know, you should check out Mud Fossil University on YouTube. The gentleman has a plethora of evidence. He goes through the science behind how it's turned into different types of materials as they've petrified or fossilized in different ways, including the blood tissue and other things. He had DNA tested a finger digit of a pointer finger, the index, just the first joint, if you will, the bone, and it's 36 inches. It's 3 feet across the where the fingernail bed is. It's huge. He also has a palm of a hand and 3 fingers and a thumb, where the palm is 3 feet. He has other things all over the place that he's found, and both of those that I'd mentioned first, he's had DNA tested, where he extracted it, he sent it in, and it came back as man's DNA. This is everyone sold himself to work iniquity and to shed much blood, and the earth was filled with iniquity. And after this they sinned against the beasts and birds and all that moves and walks on the earth, and much blood was shed on the earth, and every imagination and desire of men, and the desire of men imagined vanity and evil continually. And Yahuwah destroyed everything from off the face of the earth, because of the wickedness of their deeds, and because of the blood which they shed in the midst of the earth, he destroyed everything. And we were left, you and I, my sons, and everything that entered with us into the ark. And behold, I see your works before me, that you do not walk in righteousness. For in the path of destruction you have begun to walk. And this is what he mentions just because of his sons being envious and doing what we consider petty things, right? But this is the path of destruction, the path of darkness he mentions. It's the ways of listening to the inclinations of these demons and watchers that are teaching them the influences of what they themselves chose to do, as opposed to what is written or what we're enjoined to do from the Almighty. It says, and you are parting one from another and are envious one of another, and that you are not in harmony, my sons, each with his brother. For I see and behold, the demons have begun their seductions against you and against your children. And now I fear on your behalf, that after my death you will shed the blood of men upon the earth, and that you too will be destroyed from the face of the earth. For whoso sheds man's blood, and whoso eats the blood of any flesh, shall all be destroyed from the earth. And there shall not be left any man that eats blood, or that sheds the blood of man on the earth, nor shall there be left to him any seed or descendants living under Shamayim. For into Sheol shall they go, and into the place of condemnation shall they descend, and into the darkness of the deep shall they all be removed by a violent death. Now, I don't want to get too much into this stuff because it is the Sabbath, but for anyone that might be discouraged or who might have accidentally eaten blood at some point in their life or have done anything that is in Scripture that might lead unto death in such a manner, don't be discouraged that you cannot repent and turn to him with all your heart. You just have to realize that there are consequences for our actions. Our bodies have to deal with the choices that we've made. There are certain things that you can do in this life that will not allow you to continue without your body being brought to dissolution. That's why it says all men die. Although if you're living and you believe, you shall never taste death at all, meaning that you could be like Eliyahu, you could be like Hanok, you could be like Baruch or Ezra, who were all taken to paradise until the consummations of the times because they turned from their evil and pleased their maker when they learned the truth. We can all be that way. And they did not do anything that required their body to die. That was the key. If you've ever murdered a man like Moshe, you have to, he didn't, well, if you've ever killed a man, you've brought blood, you've done a thing, you have to die. And he did die. Abraham killed and he died. David killed and he died. Every man that's killed had to die. Every man that will ever kill will have to die. That's just a fact. That's the way he's established it. So I'm hoping you can see that because it's what is written and his word is reality. That doesn't mean you can't repent, but that means there's consequences for our actions. This is what he meant by counting the cost before trying to build the tower, right? So this is great encouragement. It doesn't matter how far you're fallen. If you can hear this and you can think, you can repent. And if you can repent, you can be saved. You just have to realize that you will have to deal with your inequities. There's certain things that might be a death sentence. You can accept it and live joyously in him and live forever, right? That's the key. It says, and there shall not be left any man that eats blood or that sheds the blood of any or of man on the earth. I already read that one, right? They shall all be removed by a violent death. And there shall be no blood seen upon you of all the blood there shall be all the days in which you have killed any beasts or cattle or whatever flies upon the earth. And work you a tov work to your souls by covering that which has been shed on the face of the earth. It mentions it in the Bereshit, and I believe it's in the Torah as well. You pour it out, you cover it, you bury the blood of animals, that you don't leave it out, especially when you're eating. If you got it on you, you wash and clean yourself up because the soul is in the blood and you don't eat with it. And you shall not be like him who eats with blood, but guard yourselves that none may eat blood before you. Cover the blood, for thus have I been commanded to testify to you and your children together with all flesh. And suffer not the inner being to be eaten with the flesh, that your blood, which is your inner being, your nephesh, may not be required at the hands of any flesh that sheds it on the earth. For the earth will not be clean from the blood which has been shed upon it. For through the blood of him that shed it will the earth be purified throughout all its generations. That's why there was a death sentence in our country. And now, my children, listen, work judgment and righteousness, that you may be planted in righteousness over the face of the whole earth, and your praise lifted up before Yahuwah, my Elohim, or my Almighty, who saved me from the waters of the flood. And behold, you will go and build for yourselves cities, and plant in them all the plants that are upon the earth, and moreover all fruit-bearing trees. For 3 years the fruit of everything that is eaten will not be gathered, and in the 4th year its fruit will be accounted kadosh, or set apart, and they will offer the first fruits acceptable before the Most High Yahuwah, who created Shamayim and earth and all things. Let them offer in abundance the first of the wine and oil as first fruits on the altar of Yahuwah, who receives it. And what is left, let the servants of the house of Yahuwah eat before the altar which receives it. And that's what you do with the first fruits. It was given to Yahuwah to be offered and given to the Kohanim because they received his portion for their uses. And in the 5th year, make you the release, so that you release it in righteousness and uprightness, and you shall be righteous, and all that you plant shall prosper. Thus did Hanok, the father of your father, command Methuselah, his son, and Methuselah, his son Lamech, and Lamech commanded me all things which the fathers commanded him. How to tend the trees and fruits of the garden, right? Sorry about that. Oh, there we go. It says, and I also will give you commandment, my sons, as Hanok commanded his son in the first Yobelim, which we've already read. Although we might not have all of the writings that he originally gave, of course, you can definitely see the differences when you compare the calendar information in the books of Hanok with the Dead Sea Scrolls. But it says, while still living, the 7th in his generation, he commanded and testified to his son and to his son's sons until the day of his death. All right, just one moment. All right, Shabbat Shalom again, everyone. This is the Genesis Apocryphon, excuse me, from the Dead Sea Scrolls, as you can see here. It is a new text and translation with introduction, special treatment of columns 13 through 17 by this gentleman right here. This is all from fragments of manuscripts that were found amongst what they call the Dead Sea Scrolls collection, or the manuscripts found amongst the Qumran scroll fragments. This particular section they've called the Genesis Apocryphon because it has to do with the beginnings or the accounts of the men in Genesis or Bereshit, and it is apocryphal or hidden writings. But willing, you guys can see here, and nothing in here, other than the commentary from the scholars, nothing in here is novel. It's all part of what's in the Dead Sea Scrolls as well. See, there's studies on the text of the desert of Judea, they call it, or Yahuda, which is the large manuscripts, the scholarly versions of the Dead Sea Scrolls, is the discoveries of the Judean desert, is what they call them. Volume 79, right? But I just want to show you a little bit about what's in here, and then we're going to get to the relevant section. We're not covering everything in here, but I wanted you to see that it's the first-hand writings of some of the patriarchs. It's not just Noach. We will come back to this at another time for Abraham and other things as well. And we'll come back to it probably next week when we get into the breakdown of where the patriarchs went and everything. Sorry about that. Because it gives a new reconstruction of the world's maps with the underlying Yobelim and Genesis apocryphons divvying up of the nations, right? Whether it's objectively true or not, because I mentioned Japheth left. There's some history that we're not exactly taught. And odd willing, as we point out these things, you guys will begin to see a pattern of what's hidden, why it's hidden, what things are obfuscated or changed or messed around with, and the purpose of it. But it's usually it's the same Satan. He's a liar, but he does the same tricks over and over, right? However, this has a different accounting of how they broke up the land with their own writings here. Sorry about that if you can hear my granddaughter. I just wanted you to see there's a little bit involved in this. There's a lot of scholarly writings and stuff that they're talking about. It's interesting to read. And then you can get to the background with the Genesis or the writing itself, okay? This is what we want to get to personally, right? You have the heir for Parkshad Abram, right? You're getting to know Noah. This is his personal writings. Like I said, we're not going to read that right now, although we could. I'll show you a little bit of it because this is contemporary with what we're at. But our goal here, what I really want you to see, is the dream that he had. So it starts about page 94. Sorry, I'm trying to get it to load. What page we're on? Page 2. Okay, that was all footnotes. Now you can see a lot of it is in fragments. It's quite broken up. They did a pretty decent job showing in the transcript or the transcription here of the spaces where you can see some of it where there's missing letters, where there's breaks in the text and it's literally missing paper. This is where it was torn. And then they did the translation. So this is why it's in fragments. They don't do this for all of the Dead Sea Scrolls, but most of them are like this. The oldest version that we have of, excuse me, of the Dead Sea Scrolls translated into English is the Penguin edition that I'm aware of. and they do their best to try to make it a continual flowing text and a narrative that you can just read along with without problems. Um, doesn't make it necessarily the most accurate for what was originally written, but they try to give you something that you can read without having it be a headache. Some of this stuff was pretty well preserved, as you can see right here, but not everything was. When you see the word vacate, that just means there was a space in the text, and there's usually like a paragraph change or a change in subject slightly. You can see that this was talking about the same issues, and it's in the first person where he's saying, I did this, I did that. Well, actually, I'll back up a little so you can see it. It says, Then I, Noach, went out and walked throughout the land, through its length and through its breadth, right? Upon it, rejuvenation in their leaves and in their fruit. The entire land was full of grass, herbs, and grain. Then I Barak Yahuwah of Shamayim, whose praise endures forever, and to whom be the esteem. Once again I Baruch the one who had compassion on the land, and who removed and obliterated from it all those doing violence and wickedness and deceit, but rescued the righteous man, one, and he obtained for all his sake, right? And then this is talking about our Mashiach appearing to him. It says, Then it appeared to me from Shamayim speaking with me and saying, Do not fear, Noach, I am with you, and with those of your sons who will be like you forever. Peru Orabu, right? Like he told to Adam, be fruitful and multiply and fill the land, rule over all of them, over its seas and over its wildernesses, over its mountains and over everything that is in them. I am now giving to you and to your sons everything for food, that of the vegetation and herbs of the land, but you shall not eat any blood. The awe and fear of you, it mentions that he's going to put that on the animals again. So you can see it's right in line, but it's in the first person from the things that we were just reading. This is talking about the sacrifice in the altar that he just put up there. Okay, I'm going backwards because I wanted to get to the beginning of the section where it talks with Noach. You can see it mentions even from his birth, he was born for righteousness, and he was born for a set purpose, including he was born with his eyes glowing like the sun. He was actually singing praises to our Maker. There was miraculous things going on that his father had issue with, but the purpose was for his will to be known and to teach us things coming later on. So if you give me just one moment, I think it's right here in the next one. Oh, okay, this is Lamech in the first person talking about when he heard Methuselah. So, and then right here is where Noach was born and brought forth for uprightness. And when he emerged from his mother's womb, he was planted for righteousness, right? The other versions go into a little more detail. It has maybe different fragments that they'd found otherwise, right? But this is the beginning of where Noach is writing in the first person right here, okay? Before that, it's his father. Before that, it might have been others. We don't have the full thing anymore. But now, to get on, it goes through what he did to make propitiation, and then it goes through the divvying up of the land. So it has that first, and then it seems to have the account. I can't see that, sorry. But then it seems to have the account of the vision that he had. So if you give me just one moment, I will look at that real quick, or I'll find it and then we'll continue, okay? So this is kind of in the middle of a narrative. I'm sorry, but again, this is the first-hand writing of Noach from the accounts that you can also read in Yobelim and Bereshit. He's writing about his sons and daughters born to him after the flood, right? And he gives a list of Aparkshad, um, You have Ham and his children, Japheth and his children, right? And then it mentions, then I, along with all of my sons, began to cultivate the earth. I planted a great vineyard on Mount Lubar, and in 4 years it produced abundant wine for me. And I brought forth all of the wine when the first feast came, on the first day of the first feast, which is in the first month, on the first day of the year, right? In my vineyard and inside of my vineyard, I opened this vessel and began to drink from it on the first day of the 5th year, after planting of the vineyard. On that day, I called together my sons and grandsons and all of our wives and their daughters. We gathered together and went, it probably says, up to the altar. I was baraking the Yahuwah of Shamayim, the Most High El, the great set apart one who delivered us from the destruction. And then you can see it's in very fragmented here. But this is the part where it starts to have the dream, and I'd like you to see, at least for what we can. You, by all means, you can take the time to study this out, pause it, and look at it more, but we're just going to cover the relevant sections, right? And he says, and he lay down and sleep, and he fell asleep, okay? And then he's having a vision. You can't see a whole lot here, but in the next one, you get a little more detail. Right. And it says, the birds of the Shamayim, the wild beasts of the field, and the livestock of the soil, and the creeping things on the dry ground, right? The stones and the clay objects were chopping and taking of it for themselves, meaning of the tree. And as I continued watching, the gold and the silver, and the blank and the iron, and all of the trees were chopping and taking of it for themselves. As I continued watching, the sun, the moon, and the stars were chopping and taking of it for themselves. Now, and I kept watching until they brought to the end the swarming creatures of the earth and the swarming creatures of the water. And so the water ceased and it ended. I turned to see the olive tree. That's that olive tree, which is equated to him, to which all of these things are coming from, using and producing things off of. The reason that the sun and the moon and the stars were chopping of the tree and taking it for themselves is because they come from Noach. They're of this stock. Our Mashiach, the light of the world, the kingdom that he set up came through him, and the stars of the children of light were in the course set before them. But it's built from what came. And that's why you see it in this parable in such a manner. It only makes sense when you look at it in the way that it's meant to in the parables there. But we'll go ahead and continue. It says, and I kept watching until they brought to an end, or that part. So the water ceased and it ended. It says, and I turned to see the olive tree and how the olive tree had grown in height. This continued for many hours with a bursting forth of many branches, good and beautiful fruit, and appearing in them. And I was pondering this olive tree and the great abundance of its leaves, everything, the tying ropes onto it. And now I was greatly astonished over this olive tree and its leaves, and continued staring in amazement. So, and you can see how much is missing here from the text. Tragically, we don't have all of the vision, but from what we do have here, you can see with the corresponding events that happen immediately after and going on, it was a vision of what was going to be, because he does nothing without first revealing it to his servants, the foretellers. And that was what this vision was. So you can see it continues here, talking about the blowing of it, the scattering, and the different fruits that come from it. There's also an interpretation that you'll see. And again, you can pause and take the time to look. I want everybody to do that on your own. I'm just trying to get to the relevant sections here so you can connect the dots, okay? He says, now listen and hear, you are the great cedar tree, right? The olive tree that came after was what was being produced from it. That's a different thing, apparently. I'm sorry about that. But the great cedar tree is what was considered to be Noach, that all these things came from. Later on, in Babylon, actually, there's another thing that comes from this. In Babylon, with Nimrod and all of the veneration of paganism that was first set up. What they did is they took the promises from our Creator about the promised seed, the signs and the stars given by Hanok with the names of the stars and the meaning of it, and the revelation of the Basora of what our Mashiach was coming to do. And they perverted it, and he attributed these things to himself. They perverted these stories, and he tried to self-fulfill the promises that were there with magic and beguiling. Um, the more we get into that, Abilene, you'll see it. But that was equated to the tree that was cut off and cut down and removed when Shem kills Nimrod and sends his body parts all over. And he says this, he shows what's going to happen to this type of belief system for people. It was done occultically or in secret until it became prominent amongst all nations. And then paganism, if you will, was the dominant religion of everyone. And that's not how it was always meant to be, though. Uh, the point I was making with that was the vision or the dream that Nebuchadnezzar has, where sees a tree that's cut down and then the stump lives, was all a phenomenon of what was based off of what Nimrod had lived through. Remember, he shows them the conditions that they are, just like Bilam had a donkey talking to him when the people were the ones that were like the stubborn donkey at that time, being the foretellers giving judgment. So there's a pattern in that. But the same pattern that you see with the tree and the being cut off and the stump and the regrowing here is echoed in Babylon with the dream that Nebuchadnezzar has, ties to this one, and it goes back to Nimrod worship with the Christmas tree and the Nule log and all that stuff that people still or might still do today. So if you give me just a minute after that, I'll show you that to tie everything in with that particular part and how it might be connected to this vision as well. But you see the interpretation that he was the great cedar standing before you on the tops of the mountains in your dream. And the shoots which emerged from it and grew high and was rising up to its height concerns the three sons, right? And they stood adhering to it, and the branches broke off, right? It's going into detail. I'll let you guys look at that for yourselves too. But it's an explanation for the vision that we don't have all the details for. However, in here, it mentions specifically that Canaan was going to be perverted. I don't know if it was in that section right there. Let me check real quick. Yeah, the first son will not separate from you all the days, and among his seed shall your name be recalled. From his divisions, all your sons. This is talking about Shem, right? It's talking about the different things that would happen with his children. Uh, and specifically, it mentions the cursing of Canaan in here, which is what happened afterwards, which is what was important because he'd actually seen it. Throw all the rebellious ones in the fire. Sorry about that. But you see, this is the problem with these ones. I would love to be able to study this out and to have the full nuances of it. But when you look at these, no matter how much you try, there's so much missing here that at best you're just guessing. And that's not something we ought to do. So you got to take it for what it is. These are fragments of things that we could have fully, and whatever you can't quite comprehend, we just set up as it's a fact that we have to deal with, but we don't ignore it and we don't change it to suit our needs, right? All right. This is from the chain of all the people who are on the earth, the agitated one of their conduct, the inadvertent error, and the waving on account of much blasphemy of the fruit. This could be talking about the things that would happen because of the children and what they were doing, right? We don't have all the details, but we do have the facts of history that played out with them. It says, then I, Noach, awoke from my sleep, and the sun rose, and I, Noach, and it broke off. And he Baruch the everlasting El. And he went to Shem, my son, and related everything to him. I must have missed the part where it mentions Cain specifically. or Ham or what had happened, but it does mention that in the vision. And then he talks about it. And then you see in the scriptures that when he woke up, he'd known what had happened and he had mentioned it to them. But then after that, you see this is talking about the visions of the land and where everything was broken up. Um, but we will save that for next time. If you give me just one more moment, I'm going to go ahead and find that other section for you and share it about the tree. So just one moment. All right, everyone. This is my Facebook page right here on my wall, if you call it that. On the pinned post is this chapter 3 festivals from the book Two Babylons by Alexander Hislop. And he covers relevant stuff that I think everyone ought to read. But I don't want to get too far into that. In this section, however, excuse me, in this section, he does mention a lot about the history here and what was going on. And then he shows this picture. There's a lot of detail about it and how the Yule log and the Christmas tree all tie into this. But this is the buddings of the Babylonian mystery religion, where they had that snake around the piece of wood, and then the new life of the palm tree growing from it, where this one was like a cedar tree and this was the palm showing victory or new life. They have it the other way around in Rome because they grew the fir tree, which has its own connotations for Baal Berith, or the Lord of the Covenant, as opposed to Baal, um, or the other one, which was the palm tree, the Lord of Victory. So a lot of this stuff ties into the pagan mighty ones that you might be familiar with and the symbols that you might be familiar with and all that. It's still used today. But the origin of it, I thought was very interesting because it has to do, just like with Nebuchadnezzar's dream and that tree being cut off and then coming from it new growth. That was a mockery of this that was set up by Nimrod, right? The mystery religions pointing to their rebirth of what was cut off by our creator here. So the founding of that type of thing, though, with the trees being used in symbology in that manner, was with the vision that Noach received right there. I can't find an earlier reference or record of it. I thought that you all might like to know that. So thank you for your time. All willing, this was edifying, and we will continue with our reading of Yobelim next week. So thank you and shalom. You have a great week and Shavua Tov.